Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward, Chapter 76. I looked into the depths of the jewel and my senses came alive. Part of me wanted to look about in the gloom to make sure I was alone, for I felt as if I wanted to keep the majestic gem to myself. But I couldn't seem to look away, even for a second. I wanted to touch the brilliant emerald. It glowed faintly in the absence of light. As I moved towards it, I felt my body begin to slow. Time became a strange thing to me. I watched myself inch across the expanse of earthen floor between me and the gem. Each step seemed to last more than a minute. As I moved closer still, each breath reverberated through my chest and was loud in my ears. I could feel the air wisp around me as I staggered on. Time seemed to fixate on this spot, this moment. I tried to push my will forward, but I moved as if through molasses. The heat of fire on my arm where the serpent's image had been etched began to pulse. The burning sensation increased dramatically. I sucked air through my teeth to stop the blinding pain as my arm radiated molten fire. I tried to press closer, but the image of the gem in front of me broke into a multitude of fragments that slowly circled a sharp point of nothingness, as if rotating around the eye of a whirlpool. My hand passed through one of the fractured images, suddenly bending and refracting at impossible angles. The blood on my arm that had been shaped so carefully by the merchant's cruel stylus finally touched the floating image. A burst of pain and sound as powerful as a molten sun exploded through me, and the image froze in midair. A great shriveling moved across the frozen image, pulling it and stretching it taut so that it hovered directly above me. The wrenching movement was accompanied by a hissing sound, and the image began to change. The image took on a metallic cast before folding in on itself, finally disappearing completely. In its place, a single eye looked back at me. It swiveled to follow me as I shook slightly from the sudden shock. The eye was metallic bronze and held a malevolence I was more certain of than knowing my own name. The eye appeared to be pressed tightly against a hole, a tearing in the fabric of existence as I knew it. It began to pull back, and I saw a shadow image of the stone pedestal replace it once again. From all directions I heard a terrible chirping of insects. A great hissing buzz whined forth. The alien sound brought with it abject terror deep within me. I could still see the faint echoes of the single bronze eye, where the image began to reform itself. I wanted to heave up the contents of my stomach. Another large bronze eye opened at the center of the glittering jewel, and I screamed. It swiveled with a cold detachedness, and turned its horrid sight on me. The bottom of the jewel resolved into a great gaping maw. Millions of bronze teeth spilled forth like needles. The needles began to move about and began crawling out of the terrible hole. They appeared to be tiny insect-like creatures that began to swarm over the brilliant jewel's surface. The bronze eye held me fast. I began to sweat, unsuccessfully attempting to pull myself backwards out of the path of the terrible insects. With horrid fascination, I saw them begin to flutter metallic wings and fly outwards from the jewel. A groaning howl escaped the bronze maw, guttural like a beast. Only madness erupted from its lips. I heard a distant shimmering noise calling to me. I felt like I was underwater with my ears plugged tightly. The insects were still exploding outwards from the gaping maw where the gem had been. They flew forth in a thick swarm of metallic buzzing. One landed on my forearm and turned as if looking me in the eye, the slow flapping of its bronze wings punctuating its crab-like movements over my skin. I felt a horrid crawling sensation as others descended upon me. One of them raised the point of its needle-sharp proboscis, preparing itself to stick itself into me. Terrified, I didn't move a muscle, lest I be pincushioned all over my body. The swarm buzzed around me. The air became a hum of metallic chirping. My sight became filled with the tiny wings and bodies. They were everywhere. I was afraid to open my mouth, knowing they would swarm into it in a moment. Again I heard the shimmering silvery sound, fainter than before. A sharp prick stuck to my left arm. The pain was terrible. At once I felt a rush of strange alien images spill into my mind, part of me seeing them race across my vision, the other part of me intently watching the insect that had stuck my arm. Others began to chirp and move, raising their stingers. My mind recoiled in fear. Even as I did so, I could see a great mass of bronze tentacles cloud over my vision, a sudden memory being forced into my brain. It pressed out the sky, the sheer size dwarfed anything my mind could picture. Reaching for this strange sky with different stars, I heard a terrible sound, inexorable as death itself. The silvery sound of bells broke the horrible vision. The swarm of insects parted and began racing back into the terrible bronze maw that lay on top of the pedestal. With terrible clarity, I saw the very air move in a torrent, flowing back into that unforgiving rent into our world. The bronze eye on top of the gem folded in on itself and disappeared. The last of the metallic insects pulled back into the rows of gnashing bronze teeth, which swallowed them whole. The musical sound that had interrupted me came again, resolving into a voice. "Eddie, wake! You must wake!" I could see the shadowy image of Eve through my tightly clenched eyelids. Frozen in fear of moving or breathing, I opened my eyes and looked at my left arm. A thin stream of blood was coming from a puncture wound. Looking more closely at its center, I could see the broken body of a tiny bronze insect. I looked on in horror. I could feel Eve's gentle arms wrapping around me, the warmth of her pressing into me. I sat there on the floor in the gloom, shell-shocked from the experience. When I looked up, I saw that I sat at the very center of a large pool of moonsilver. I was sitting on a tiny precipice of dry ground that rose above this strange liquid, completely surrounded by it. I no longer wondered what lay beneath its hidden depths at that moment. It swirled in odd tide-like patterns, small waves crashing into each other before shifting into tiny swirling whirlpools, no larger than the breadth of my palm. The surface rippled and spun, creating odd patterns and shadows on its surface. "What did you see?" Eve's tone was apprehensive, but very intent. Her amber eyes glowed faintly as she stared at me. "I saw a great pedestal. It sat at the very center of this immense cavern. I was drawn to it, but then I found I could not tear my eyes from it. There was a giant emerald that blazed like a beacon when a ray of light hit it. I tried to approach it, to take it for myself, but time seemed to slow down the closer I came to it. When I touched it, I could see a terrible being watching me from the other side of reality. There was a great bronze eye that stared back through the rift at me." The gem fell away into an enormous mouth that spilled forth a legion of insects. I was afraid they would sting me to death. One stung me, here. Was it real? I felt the fatigue of being forced through an ordeal. I wrapped my arms around Eve and held her to my chest. I could feel the beating of her heart matching in time to my own. I closed my eyes, hoping I would not see any further nightmares when the world disappeared from view. Blessedly, none appeared. I moved my hand slowly through Eve's silver hair and held her close to me. "Thank you for coming back for me." I sat there, unmoving, feeling the warmth of her, glad to be alive. "In the olden days," Eve said, "many of my people would come to seek the great oracle. Not 1 in 1,000 would be blessed with the gifting of sight. Those that did were celebrated by our people, entreated to share what they had seen, so that we could protect our future. Many of them went mad, but it was their sacrifice that allowed us to live on through the long years. I am sorry, Eddie. Truly, I am sorry. You are very special to us, very special to me. Please do not think poorly of our elders, for only in this way have they been able to carry themselves through time, giving what small aid they can. Their gift can be a terrible burden, but it is with great need that it is granted. Please forgive them. I did not know what would happen, Eddie. I am sorry." Eve covered her eyes with a hand, weeping hot tears against my chest. I held her close to me, numbly holding her, unsure what else to do. My mind raged and swirled, but my passion for the wondrous being who had fiercely laid her emotions bare to me was sure. I lowered one arm to steady myself on the ground, suddenly uncertain of the terrible waves of silvery substance that surrounded us. What would happen if I touched the surface? If one of us fell in? I dared not even contemplate it. I wanted none of what I had seen. The evil I had felt had been incredibly powerful, all-encompassing. More terrible still was the intelligence behind that single malevolent eye I had seen. It had somehow known me fully, to my very core, I was certain. I had never spoken my name aloud, but I feared it would find me again when I was alone in the darkness. I trembled involuntarily. Eve pulled me up to my feet. I too was ready to be away from this place. I was now certain the strange feeling that I had felt was the lingering feel of death that pervaded the very air. How many centuries had this chamber stood? How many aeons? I looked above and saw the glimmering strands of sunlight that filtered down from above. This place was nothing more than a tomb, and yet it was somehow. My skin crawled every moment that we lingered. Eve pulled me gently on, her pale form just ahead of me. Her hand was linked in mine, and I felt the warmth there. I wondered if Stannon would ever find me, given what had transpired. Even if he were able to track me to the great temple, how would he budge the doors open? I suddenly felt very alone. Eve led me ever onward, farther into the great chamber under the earth. We moved across the gallery that seemed to be built for titanic creatures. As we continued on, I saw beautiful murals paint the walls. Every color adorned them. Winding mosaic patterns intersected each other. Great winged humanoid figures appeared at the center of bright rings of color. Plumes of fire dropped away from the painted images, falling from the sky. The strange figures held their faces up, seeing something in the great expanse of painted sky. What they saw I could not say. Strange mirror-like surfaces appeared at different points on the wall, creating an effect of linking the patterns into one immense image that sprawled hundreds of spans. The design was cunning. I had almost missed the near-invisible edge where the mirrors interlocked. They were rimmed in a silvery substance that reminded me of the pools that crisscrossed the floor of the gargantuan chamber. "Eve, were those your people?" I said, pointing at one of the murals. She laughed and pulled me close for a moment, pointing my arm to some of the smaller figures on the edges of the pattern. "Those were our great ancestors. They were said to worship great majestic beings, such as the ones depicted on that wall. They were said to have almost godlike power. Some may have worshipped them as if they were gods." She looked on in wonder. "Eddie, even our ancestors did not fully understand the great beings who once had graced this chamber. We built this place for them as a way they could meet them in our world. They were thought to be great travelers. This is all I know of them. When my sister, Amael, fell..." Eve stopped for a moment, gathering herself. "Much was lost of our history. No one was chosen by the great oracle for many long years. I didn't truly believe the oracle had ever existed. I had only heard stories of it long before I was born." "When it gifted you with a seeing?" "When it gifted you with a seeing, what you saw is of great importance, but what it means, I cannot say." Eve gingerly reached out a lithe arm and touched me on the cheek, almost as if she was unsure if I was real. "Is this a tomb?" I said. "Where did those giants go?" I looked into Eve's amber eyes, pools of molten gold, and suppressed a shiver. She moved closer to me. "I don't know. I'm sorry, Eddie." She looked down and away. She slowly linked her hand in mine and gently pulled me along, not speaking. I didn't press her, and glided along with her, marveling in awe at the strange paintings that rose hundreds of spans above us. I trusted Eve. She would not leave me alone again. I squeezed her palm, reassuring myself she was still there. I could feel a breeze coming up from above. I perked up, hoping to find an exit to the great cavern. Part of me knew it couldn't continue on forever, but the barely stifled darkness caused strange thoughts to enter my head. The beams of light that filtered down from above would disappear periodically, making me wonder what covered them. They reappeared at odd intervals, giving the impression of movement. It was impossible, I knew. We had come into a cavern cut deep in the earth. It must be some strange mechanism from above that caused it, I told myself uncomfortably. Eve grew excited as we moved on in the odd darkness. She moved with an energy that surprised me. I felt drained after my vision. I wanted only to banish the image from my mind, but I could not. It was burned into me, etched painfully into my memories. I was sure I would never forget what I had seen.